All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Pleasure having you all today, and thanks for coming. My name is Ben Julia. I'm the Senior Director of Sales at Guerrero Media, the publishing house who puts together American Builders Quarterly. Oftentimes, I'm asked to summarize the goal of American Builders Quarterly, and as someone with a real estate background, the first thing I always like to say is that it's the favorite brand, my favorite brand that we have here, even though I'm not technically supposed to have favorites. I think a big reason for that is being able to highlight the projects and executives that are changing the physical landscape and daily environments that people interact with on a global scale. And the fact that we're able to do that here at American Builders Quarterly is pretty incredible. You know, our goal is to connect those people and ideas by sharing the important stories and impressive achievements with the rest of the built world. And hearing from leaders in construction, design, and development, as well as facilities across multiple industries and titles, our network is united by their passion for innovation. And in doing so, are able to learn to apply these lessons to their own careers, which is very powerful. And that's what brings us here today, to celebrate the release of American Builder Quarterly's latest sustainability issue that we're very excited to present to the world. As we continue to feel the effects such as on issues such as global warming, climate change, and others, in our own communities, it's clear that we can no longer rely solely on individuals doing their part to combat this crisis and reduce their carbon footprints. Corporations need to act. And the sustainability issue highlights exactly that. Several facilities executives who have led initiatives and projects without compromising aesthetic, cost, and accessibility to their organizations and the projects they're working on, which is phenomenal. Our guest interview today is ABQ's sustainability issue cover star, Vincent Melito. He's the Director of Facilities and Site Operations at International Group House. And we're honored to have you here with us, Vincent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
great
definitely.
to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Excited to get into some stuff today. But before we do, just for everybody here, a little background on Vincent. He actually brings 30 years of experience in design, construction, facilities management, and international business. His career includes positions at illustrious organizations such as NatWest Bank, British Airways, and Tiffany & Company, now being International House. His design and construction experience varies from residential design, luxury retail, commercial real estate, health and wellness, and hospitality design, to name a few. And his graduate studies focused on environmental design in corporate workplace. He's worked on numerous LEED certified projects and energy reducing initiatives with a continued interest in driving sustainability for the global environment, all of which makes him a perfect fit for the cover of our upcoming issue. So thanks again for joining us. It's great to have you here. And before we get started and jump into the questions, I did want to note that if you do have any questions for Vincent during the interview, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them during our Q&A section following the interview. So without further ado, let's dive in here. To start things off, I'd love to just, tell us a little bit about how you're doing, Vincent. Things are opening up. I know you're in New York, which is there's a lot going on there right now. How have you been doing?
Well, thank you for that, Ben. Doing okay, actually. We've had a tough, certainly at International House, we've had a tough 16 to 18 months. We're in the educational sector, and our customers are people, international graduate students, and with the political climate that was, occurring prior to the pandemic, and then obviously through the pandemic, that was a challenge in and itself. And then when you have a pandemic and people cannot get in and out of the United States to attend universities, that posed a secondary problem, which was quite significant for us. We're right next to Columbia University, Barnard, and Manhattan School of Music, so we cater to a large percentage of those type customers, residents that attend those universities, and they attend 60 different universities in Manhattan area, but predominantly to those schools. So when they shut down, we shut down. So the difficulty in just trying to get through the pandemic was a challenge, but we see a light at the end of the tunnel, and we see a lot of universities opening up. So for us, it's how do we regain that business, and how do we continue or pick up where we left off in terms of our sustainability efforts. And that's always a challenge, because that requires a lot of capital. And when you don't have a business that's producing revenue, some of those projects can get easily cut. So, but we do have the full support of our board, and we are optimistic that we will get to a lot of those efforts and continue our sustainability efforts going forward for our 5-year strategic plan.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of our executives and readers can relate to, is this idea of things got put on hold during going remote, especially for, yourself, and we're very heavily involved in higher education. There wasn't a lot of in-person or physical things going on. So I think a lot of people can relate to that. But to your point, we do see light at the end of the tunnel, which I think is promising. It seems like a lot of things are opening up, and that's really exciting as well. And I think specifically, as you mentioned, from a sustainability effort standpoint, really excited to get those things back going, because they're really important.
Yes.
Great.
And it's more important now with air quality being, a real issue in terms of trying to have healthy buildings to combat any future pandemic issues. So it's kind of elevated certain parts of the sustainability platform that you have to sort of refocus on now. So it's a nice challenge to have, but one that we are anticipating and welcoming.
Yeah, I think some of these initiatives are probably highlighted even more, even brought to the forefront more now because of the health, like you said, how it is compatible with health issues and things like that too. So it'll be exciting to see what everyone can do collectively moving forward. The next question I have for you is, I know obviously before coming to International House and becoming the group director of facilities and site operations there, you did work in the for-profit sector at companies like British Airways and Tiffany & Co., working on reducing carbon footprints and other sustainability issues. And so what I think I'd love to hear from you is some of the takeaways and or differences of what you brought from that for-profit sector into the nonprofit sector working at International House.
Sure. Well, the challenge, both those companies that I previously worked at were, significant in size, and also incredibly focused on their brand. So brand focus played a huge role in terms of what projects you can really undertake in terms of sustainability, and which ones you kind of had to shy away from. Case in point, well, BA was, aircraft movement is a huge carbon footprint, producer. And we had a whole team that just basically studied on how to reduce air traffic, and obviously when you're putting 6,000 planes in the air on any given business day, that's a lot of, carbon production. So that was the biggest focus, was in terms of our aircraft movements. On a secondary level, my role was to really manage the physical side, everything what we call below the wing. And everything below the wing was physical plant, physical structures, architecture, design for pretty much half the globe. And in those regions, we focused on, lounges, airport terminals, the design of airport terminals, aircraft hangars, engineering facilities, administrative offices. So now you focus on that, and what you look at is materials. You look at getting LEED certification for a lot of those projects if you can. And a lot of them are in faraway lands, so they don't necessarily have what the US has or other countries in terms of they're not out in the forefront of sustainability initiatives,
Mhm.
and also the difficulty of getting materials. I did a project in India that made it very difficult to get materials to build a first-class lounge, and just getting materials in, whether they were green or not, is an incredible challenge. So that was where a lot of our focus was, below the wing. And then when you move into Tiffany was very specific about what types of materials they use in their store. Obviously, that's a brand that has to protect everything. I started out a lighting initiative project there. I had a fellow from Harvard University who was going to Harvard for her degree in sustainability, and she was with the EDF fund, so they placed her with me, and we worked on a lighting upgrade retrofit around the world in 305 locations. That was a significant capital investment,
Yeah.
about $8 million in capital investment. So that obviously is not possible with a not-for-profit. So
Yeah.
you have to have two big companies with a lot of capital, and they have to believe in what they're doing, and there has to be a return on your investment. And on
Mhm.
an $8 million investment, there was an $18.8 million return over a 5-year period. So it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It literally took me 5 minutes to get our CEO, Tiffany, to approve a project like that.
Yeah.
And that kind of support is incredibly valuable when you're trying to do major improvements. And then you take that to a smaller not-for-profit. When I moved to International House, which has been around 100 years, so it's well established, and it does have the resources for a not-for-profit
Mhm.
to make investments like that, but it's a little bit more cautious, and also a little bit of sensitive to the market and what's going on there. So coming here, the projects were much smaller. The capital was a lot less. And, when you have less capital and you have no room for mistakes, you have to be very, very careful about what projects you take on and which ones you actually push aside.
Yeah.
So for us, it was really about building infrastructure and plant. So the big difference is, obviously you need capital to do a lot of these projects. You go to not-for-profit, you don't have the capital. You have to be very, very selective on what you can do, what type of investment is going to, and what the ROI is on that project. And some projects just cannot be accepted within a not-for-profit just because they're capital intensive.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that, I think, mentioning the resource pool is something that I know a lot of nonprofits, especially maybe ones that aren't as established, that might be a little bit more of a hurdle to get over too when you're looking at sustainability issues. But to your point, I think, when we're talking about sustainability, we might get this a little bit later on too, but the scale, while it might be a smaller scale, comparatively speaking, it still can go a really long way and have a massive impact, which I think is really important kind of as a takeaway for, regardless of if you're spending 8 million or, 500,000, the impact can be large, especially in a local community or a slightly smaller community, as opposed to maybe a British Airways where it's a global impact, right? And so I think that's something that's a really great takeaway. I'm glad you kind of brought that up. So thanks.
Yeah, small projects do add up to significant savings, and those should never be overlooked because they're easy to achieve. They have less capital intensive contributions or resources needed, and you can get them done quicker, and the ROI is quicker.
Yeah.
So when you're spending 8 million over a 2-year period, you have to wait 5 years to get a good ROI on that. And you can spend $100,000 and get an ROI within 8 months, 10 months on some of these projects. Yes.
That's awesome. No, I think that's a really great point. And kind of, building off of that, would love if you could share some of your thoughts on the sustainability efforts that you've introduced to your team at International House since you've been there.
Yeah, sure. It was a little bit of everything, to be honest. Sustainability was not something that they were, familiar with. Little bits and pieces, but I don't think the focus was there prior to me getting here almost 6 years ago. So I focused on small things up front because I knew I could kind of relatively do that under the radar with the budget that we had. And then when I built some successes there, then I sort of coupled them together and kind of took it to our CEO and said, here's some great initiatives that we were able to achieve, and they are smaller in savings and easier to do, but quite, as you said, impactful. They help. Every little bit helps. And What we focused on material purchasing. So we started to focus on what types of products are we buying, and we spent, about $500,000 a year in product purchasing, just shy of that. And we made sure everything we purchased was green, sustainable, healthy for the environment. So we had a whole painting program that we changed to VOC paints. And that was the first time we did that. And that, that doesn't give you a lot of money back, but what it does is it chips in towards a healthier and a sustainable institution for a longer haul, and a healthier work environment for residents and staff. So, those things are important, and those things sell, and they perk up the ears of trustees that approve projects. So I looked at things politically that I knew I can get buy-in from the C-suite and also the trustees. And then we turned our attention to things like electrical consumption, oil and gas consumption. We looked at how do we operate the physical plant and the heating and cooling seasons. We brought in engineers to evaluate and do sort of retro commissioning of the machinery to try to see if we can drive down savings and how we operate there. And that was really where we got a lot of our significant savings. Most of our expenditure in the building is in heating and cooling. So, and it's twice as much as electrical usage. So that's where we focused. And we had some very good low hanging fruit that we knocked off, and we were able to get some substantial savings. And that kind of, each project got a little bit bigger in terms of capital investment, and also a little more ambitious in terms of challenges, things that we didn't think we could do 5 years ago. And now talking about rooftop gardens and, sustainable landscaping and water collection reservoirs, which we're now looking at now to try to collect. We're in Manhattan, so we collect a lot of water off the rooftops, and pumping that down and use that. So that stuff that wasn't even in our thinking 5 years ago. We started very basics. We looked at uniforms, uniforms that were recyclable. We looked at all footwear. We looked at PP&E. We looked at and purchasing materials. So we started there. We moved into the electrical, oil, gas, and now we're taking it a step further and trying to do a little more sophisticated type sustainable projects.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I love the concept too of, I think a lot of places too, maybe don't know where to start. And like you said, kind of just starting small with some of these things that maybe don't seem like big ticket items, but they do accumulate over time. And then, like you said, you can kind of take that equity from the response and the feedback you get from these smaller projects and build that into larger projects as you go. And I think the important thing that I took away too is just this idea of just starting the conversation, right? If it's not something that you're doing right now, again, starting small, but also just having that conversation and making these things happen. And then now, when you're talking about some of these landscaping and all of the water wells and all that, I think that those are some really cool initiatives. Like you said, never would have happened if you hadn't started with just redoing the paint or the lights or something like that. Small.
Right.
Thank you. All right, great. So then I'd like to dive in a little bit as well, something that we talked about in the article. So, while reducing International House's carbon footprint, you also managed to reduce the operating expenses by a significant amount, almost $200,000. And I would love to, if you could give us a little insight and tell us a bit about your methods for planning and executing that.
Sure. A lot of that was hinged to a lighting retrofit project that we did. So what I noticed when I first came here is the lighting was not up to par. It was dated, and having come out of Tiffany and just finished a very large project doing that, I had the confidence, let's put it that way, and I had a little more knowledge to take on that. So we have about 330,000 square feet of facility space that we maintain, and so we set out and just earmarked very simply. I didn't know what the product would be, and I was able to secure $100,000 and said we'll start there, and then we ended up securing maybe another 185,000 in year two. And we started working floor by floor, and we started lighting up retrofits that we needed to do. And once we partnered that, we watched the electrical bills start to go down. And then we kind of sought the additional funding to complete a second phase. So it was kind of a 2-year project, just shy of 2 years. And the savings is substantial in terms of electrical usage. So The first year we saved about $84,000. We made an investment of 100. So it really only took us about 14 months to pay it back.
Wow.
The second year was like 185 roughly. And that took us just about 15 to 16 months to pay that back. That was completed in about the beginning of 2018. So we're now 3.5 years into that, and we're seeing electrical savings go down. And now we're above our reduction is now above $100,000 in savings for kilowatt usage. So clearly we've paid that project back. And now we went in and did all new dimmers. We did a lighting control system, which was about $50,000 for the one building. And those things are driving costs. So electrical cost is down. And the second part of the savings is we made we had one building that operated on a number 2 heating fuel, and we switched that to natural gas. And with Con Edison and the local authority here in New York and NYSERDA. So we partnered with them, and we were able to make a major investment into that and switch. And that cut our oil consumption down, which burns at a less efficiency rate than natural gas, into natural gas. We still have the oil as a backup just in case.
Yeah.
But we don't use it, and we predominantly heat with gas, and that's driving about a $60,000 to $70,000 savings annually.
Wow, that's awesome. No, thanks for providing that insight. I think the great thing about what you said too is this idea of, I think sometimes people think of sustainable as being expensive, and maybe in the short term, it's kind of like an investment up front, but those savings you mentioned, a 14-month turnaround, I don't think that's always the perception of how quickly you can get some of your returns on something that's sustainable like that, and some of those methods. So I think that it's great to shed a light on that, where it doesn't take a lot, and you can save a lot of money much quicker than maybe people would think you could on some of these projects that you mentioned.
Yeah. We aggressively look for about we would accept a 3-year return on our investment, but we typically want the project to pay for itself. But I prefer to be aggressive and look for 2 years or less. And sometimes you just can't do it. I mean, solar is a long ROI, and wind is as well. We've looked at that. And those projects just require a lot of capital, and they don't really have the ROI in a quick period. So, I think for us, you have to kind of target the aggressive, smaller type projects and do the best you can. And then if you can get past that point and you still have an appetite to execute further, then obviously then you can go for the bigger type initiatives. But we might get there. I think we will over time, but they take more of a major investment.
Well, and in the meantime, you're leveraging savings on your current initiatives that can help in other ways as well to do that, to do other things too. So it's a little bit, like you said, a little bit more of a long-term perspective on it. I think that's all of these things add up over time to help you achieve some of those things in the long term as well.
That's correct.
Okay, great. All right. The next question I have is, in your story, you talk about partnering with Columbia University's graduate students who are actually earning their master's in sustainability, and you worked with them to implement some of these programs at your national house. We thought that was a really cool program and a great thing to do. As you mentioned, you're right next to Columbia in New York. Can you tell us a little about some of those programs and the results that you've seen since rolling them out?
Sure. So we typically do a couple of fellowships, a lot of fellowships actually, and one of them every year we do is a green fellow, and we interview, and there's a lot of interest in that. We get a lot of talented individuals that are working on their degrees in one way or another. Some of them are architectural degrees, which I have, and some are strictly just sustainability. They're working on their masters, and these are all graduate students or their PhD. So they bring incredible knowledge, passion, and energy to whatever project we have. So I typically get one every year. We pay them for that position, so they are getting a stipend. And then we give them a list. We give them 4, 5, 6, sort of a couple of easy, self-explanatory objectives, and then we give them a couple far-reaching ones, and we see how far we can get them to go. And then they meet with me on a bi-weekly basis, and I kind of just keep prodding them to try to get them to deliver something that's tangible. And then they have to deliver at least 3 of the 6 ideas at the end of to get their final sign off. And usually they get some credit as well at Columbia.
That's really
So
cool.
what some of the things that we've done is we've designed a rooftop garden that we want to implement. We're about to do it last year and that got paused. So I think I will be doing it this fall into the spring of 2022. We came up with, what do we do with food scraps? We have a full dining program that wastes about 300 pounds of food scraps a day, 7 days a week. And so we started to look at research. We partnered up with New York City Sanitation. We went into a composting program where all the food scraps were collected 3 days a week. And then they were spread out in some of the natural parks in New York City. And they would use it for composting. Then we found out that we can take that a step further. And we went through a biodigester, which is a device that takes up to about 650 pounds of food scraps a day in a 24-hour period and breaks it down using bacteria. And then it becomes part of wastewater and it gets washed away into the system. So it actually breaks it down within this machine and never has to leave the premises. And then we start to save on sort of scope 2 emissions. We don't have trucks picking up waste scraps all through Manhattan. And we cut down on that. So now it stays on the premises, it gets digested on the premises, and it gets washed out on the premises. So it's not an inexpensive process. You do have to pay for that machine. It's pretty sophisticated, but it's well worth it. And that's what she came up with, my green fellow 2 years ago. And then she did a little bit more work in terms of the physical plant and also the lighting control system, which some of it we implemented and some we're about to implement in 2022 as well. So yeah, it's great. If they bring creative ideas, they have a lot of passion. And they learn a lot, and I learn probably twice as much off of them. So it's great to be around people that are just so passionate about what they want to study and how they want to change the world. So and I kind of keeps my team invigorated. So it's a successful program that I hope that we keep doing for a long time.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. Like you said, being able to tap into some of these people that are coming up with, maybe less experience, but the ideas are more off the wall. And this day and age, sometimes those are the best ideas that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of otherwise. So being able to tap into that and then also have it, be great experience for them. I feel like it's a really cool program. When I read about that, it sounded really exciting. So I'm glad you guys have a lot of success from it too, so you can keep doing it.
Yep.
All right, and I know we're getting a little close on time here, but the last question I wanted to ask is, with your expertise in this area, a lot of the projects you just mentioned, working both private, public sectors, or for-profit and not-for-profit, might be a little loaded question, but I'd love to get a little bit of maybe your advice that you give to other industry leaders who are looking to, basically start similar initiatives at large corporations or organizations, or any kind of final thoughts you would give as, your advice from what you've learned through your years in going for these sustainable initiatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the points I would make is that first you have to get leadership to buy into it. If they don't buy into what you're doing, they won't support it. And if you don't have support from above and you don't have the capital investment or whatever, if there is a capital investment, it's very difficult to get things done in any organization, even a small organization. I think buy-in and educating them on why it's important and for the business. And it's not always about money savings. It's about doing the right thing for the world, and it's about playing a pivotal role. It's also, there's a lot of regulatory initiatives that are being set out there. New York City has their own for 2024. And I have to express to our trustees that we have to comply with that. We cannot operate if we don't comply. So it's really about educating them. And then the second step is to really start small. Pick the low hanging fruit, do the small projects that you can accomplish and that you have a fairly good rate of success. You're fairly confident you're going to succeed at it. And when you have a lot of small victories, and it starts to build momentum, and compounded energy and momentum is a critical part of having a sustainability program, because you just can't jump in and take on something too big and get bogged down in that when you can have a lot of small victories up front. And when you build those small victories, you get trust. And I think that's where you can then tackle the bigger projects. And that's kind of what I learned at Tiffany and Company is, we started with a lot of smaller projects comparable to Tiffany's size. They were big for a not-for-profit, but and then we blossomed into projects that were in the 5-figure $1 million range, and that requires a lot of thought, a lot of planning, a lot of people to implement, but you got to be able to execute and succeed. So I'd say start small, incremental changes add up quickly, and build trust within the C-suite and the trustees so that they have confidence that what you put out, you can actually accomplish.
Great. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, like you said, I mean, gaining buy-in is huge. You talk about how you were able to do it at International House, and then yeah, starting small, which is what you've done too, and you've kind of created the successful pathway to do that. And I think you've proven in the results that you've had, and where you guys are looking to go in the future. I think it's, again, really exciting stuff. So I really appreciate the advice there, as I'm sure everyone else does as well. I know we're close on time. I think we have one question here. So I think it kind of goes along to that last point you made. Do you have any tips on how specifically to gain support from the company to get behind the sustainability initiatives? Is there anything that you could recommend, or conversations you were able to have, or how to? I think you mentioned a little bit of really kind of pivoting it from an ROI standpoint to leadership. But anything else you would add to that before we kind of sign off here?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to examine the broader, spectrum of what you're trying to accomplish, and really, pitch that. You have to pitch that this is something that the company should be doing. It's you have a moral obligation to do that. And I think for us, it's easy at International House. The president of EDF is one of our board of trustees. And I know him. He's a fantastic guy. And we have several trustees that are very switched on in terms of sustainability. And it's one of our strategic goals. We want institutional sustainability. And we need to do that to last another 100 years. So it's kind of in our mission statement. So it makes it a little bit easier for me. If you don't have an organization that gets behind that, it's very difficult to get trust. But if you build small and you have successes and you show people that you can do things successfully, and that there can be a return, then it starts to be a no-brainer. So I would do that. I would communicate the competitive advantages of it. If you're in a profit industry, then the competition, all the competition is doing something typically better than you, unless you're a front runner. At BA, we looked at other airlines and we said, this airline's doing this and this airline's doing that. And that usually gets people's attention. What are the competitors doing? And it's hard to do it in a not-for-profit, but when you're working for a for-profit, it's very easy to use the competitive wedge to try to drive support behind a lot of these projects. So I would focus on those two areas most. And that really, that's kind of just from my experience, that's how I achieved it. And maybe I stumbled through it, but we were lucky enough to get success. And I think slowly we built confidence that whatever I pretty much asked for later in my years, they were going to support because they knew I was going to bring them an ROI on it.
Yeah, you created a track record of it, which is the idea behind it. And yeah, I think that's great too. I mean, the idea that nowadays public perception of a company can go a really long way. So sustainability issues, again, even if it's not necessarily showing up on the bottom line, it's going to hold a lot of ethos for people who are working with your organization or wanting to do business with your company, so to speak. Especially if you're customer facing. So again, this has been phenomenal. I really appreciate your insights today, Vincent. I know we're a little over time, so we're gonna let you go here. It's been great hearing from you, and I hope everyone learned a little bit on the impact that sustainability can have at your organization, and really how to move it forward if it's something that you're passionate about, and it's something that we all need to be passionate about these days. So hope everyone enjoyed it. Just so you know, you will be receiving a recording of this event. It'll be made available probably in the next couple of days here. So keep a lookout for that. It'll get sent out. And then we'd also greatly appreciate if you would take a quick minute to fill out our survey for this event, which will be sent out actually right after this in your inboxes. So keep a lookout for that. Any feedback would be welcome. Thanks again for joining us, and really thanks for your time, Vincent. This has been a great experience. So have a great rest of your day, and talk soon.
Thank you, Ben. Thank
All
you.
right.
Take
Bye.
care.